Southern women are like my favorite audience to talk to. This is great. Kelly, really thank you for this opportunity to get to address my colleagues or my community. You know, we lived in Jacksonville for most of my life, and it's just a great opportunity to get to talk with you all here. So I'm going to start here today and talk about what the genesis of a lot of this work comes from. When I was at the 1984 Olympics, Donna Deverona, who's about maybe 15, 20 years my senior, she had won gold medals in the 1964 Olympics, and she came and talked to the whole Olympic team. And she said, "You're about to become famous, and what are you going to do with it?" So of course I heard that first part, like, I want to be famous. But then I had never really thought about, like, what was I going to do with that? What was that going to mean? What was that, right? And I was in the age of the pure amateur, so I still had to get a job. And right, I had, I stopped swimming when I was 22 years old. I had a whole career ahead of me of what was I going to do, and how was I going to have the Olympic movement be able to forward whatever else that I wanted to do. So I spent a long time, probably 20 years, doing almost nothing with my legal career and my career than making sure that boys and girls, men and women, in high school, in colleges, and all schools had equal educational opportunities, which includes sports. Sports is a type of education, right? And I know that there are probably a lot of athletes out here. Everybody who ever played a sport ever, raise your hand. Okay? Right. So the least important thing that I got out of my athletic career is, frankly, those gold medals. I loved it, don't get me wrong, and it's fun to show them off still, age 56. But I know you're all shocked. No way. But the most important thing I got out of it was I learned the same things that you all learn here, which is how to win, how to lose, how to postpone short-term gratification for long-term rewards, how to be part of a team, all those kinds of things that it's hard to learn those things on a blackboard. Eisenhower said that sports are training for war. What he meant was that our country needs physically active and physically fit citizens. At that time, really what he meant was boys, back in the Eisenhower days. And because of this amazing statute, Title IX, I got not only a college scholarship, but I also got to make sure that hundreds and thousands of other kids also have those sports opportunities. That's great, and I still do some of that. But like I'm sure you all have this professionally. I've done that so many times, and a million people ask me, like, well, aren't boys more interested in sports? Like shoot me with a gun. Like, I've already defended that argument like 500,000 times. Please don't ask me that, because it's just not true. And I've got all the data to back it up. And I wrote a book about it, but we're not going to do that here today. So I was like looking for other things, and right about that time, Title IX started getting into violence that was happening on college campuses. And I had the great fortune of getting to work with University of Colorado for 5 years. You may have heard about a case, Lisa Simpson was raped by football recruits at the University of Colorado, and it went up to the appellate court, and where Lisa Simpson won at the appellate level. And then the parties, the plaintiff and defendant's lawyers, had to find somebody that could work with the school for 5 years. And I got to do that. So not only did I learn Title IX from the perspective of sort of in theory, or how to do it on paper or whatnot, but I really learned, like, here's how we do it in practice. I'll probably never know it the way that Joyce knows it from the Betty Griffin house. I'll probably never know at that level, but I learned, like, how you take somebody through a process and how you make sure that they get the kind of remedy it is that they need to be able to stay in school, to make sure that sexual violence doesn't stop them in their educational trajectory, okay? That their life is able to go on. So whatever it is that they need is what we what we were trying to provide them. A lot of times what they needed was, they need to have their assailant off campus. They need to have them gone. You go somewhere else. And so they need to hold hearings, right? So I kind of learned like, there's like a playbook, if you will, when somebody goes to school, and in high school or in college, and they are sexually assaulted or sexually harassed or sexually abused, there's a playbook, and there's an attorney who knows exactly what to do to help this person be able to address this so that, again, the student can continue in their education. All right, tons and tons of fun. Then I started getting calls, the exact same story, except this time the person was participating in a club or Olympic sport, okay? When I say club or Olympic, what I mean is probably most of the sports that your kids are participating in, these are sports that are not associated with a school, okay? So I mean, I'm sure you could practically throw a stone here and you can find a soccer program, okay? That's part of the Olympic movement. They are a member of United States Soccer. Soccer is a sport underneath the umbrella of the United States Olympic Committee. All right, does everybody know what I'm talking about now? All my life, I swam under the umbrella of even when I was, 7 years old and just starting to swim. So, right, so you better know what I'm talking about. Okay, so club and Olympic sport movement. Okay, we're not talking about 800 athletes that is once every 4 years. That's not it. We're talking about 8 million children and more than double that number of athletes and more than double that number of people who are involved in the movement. So this is 20, 40 million people. This is a huge endeavor here. Okay, so somebody would call me and they were abused as part of a club and Olympic sport movement. Well, it just turns out that not only do I know the playbook for what happens in schools, but I also know the playbook of how it happens in club and Olympic sports. How do I know it? Because my coach from the 1984 Olympics, his name is Mitch Ivey, and Mitch Ivey has been banned by United States Swimming for molesting my teammate at the time. He had already married one of his other swimmers. Marriage was a way for him to legitimize what molestation that had been going on for years. The marriage lasted about 3 months. He married a total of 3 of his swimmers. The total of those 3 marriages did not equal 1 year. He married another swimmer where it was equaled another year. I like to describe Mitch Ivey as somebody who leaves a wake of destruction behind him wherever he goes. And so I got to see up close and personal, but before I swam for him, and before I was exposed to sexual abuse, that like how the child, her name was Suzette Moran, she's been very public, she was on ESPN's Outside the Lines, how Suzette got co-opted and how it is that he convinced her that she had to do everything that he said. I got to see it up close and personal. And when it happened the first time with Noelle Moran, who unfortunately ended up committing suicide. Well, that's the emotional destruction I'm talking about. But Noelle Moran, I didn't understand why her teammates were so mad about it. Why are they so, what, did they want to be dating Mitch Ivey? Why were they so upset? Well, then when you live with it, you can see the turmoil that it creates for everybody on the pool deck. And so knowing how it happens, knowing how that because of the power relationship between a coach and an athlete, knowing the hunger that athletes have to be great. I kind of described that, when I was training, that the goal of being in the Olympics kind of had me by the throat. Like, I wanted it really badly. Like, like this sort of sending out into the universe, like, this is what I want, God. This is, and for many athletes, first of all, and you have to have a coach to do it. You just can't do it by yourself in almost any sport. I've heard of some marathon runners who didn't really get into marathon running until like they were in their middle 20s. But except for them, most people, you need just for skill development, for all kinds of things, you really need to have somebody else. And I don't know how only club and Olympic sports got out from under normal society norms. When I say normal society norms, I mean typically when somebody's involved in taking care of large numbers of children, we have normal rules that are in place about taking care of those children and what's that appropriate relationship between a child and an adult, okay? So, for example, children and adults in classrooms, they're not alone together, number one. They're not on social media together. They don't give their children gifts. They don't single them out for special attention. And whereas none of those rules were existing in this club, this millions of kids, this Olympic movement. So we like to say that certainly not every coach is a pedophile. I was world class for 8 years. I had phenomenal coaches, amazing coaches who weren't just great coaches, they were amazing people. And so not every coach is a pedophile. But every pedophile wants to be a coach because it is how they get access to children. There's nobody above them. So coaches who are part of a school system, they have the athletic director, they've got the president of the school, or the headmaster, or but you can see like there are layers and layers on top of them that are telling them the general counsel position on how it is that they're supposed to be interacting with children. Typically in club and Olympic sports, the coaches are the top dog, and there's nobody overseeing them. There's nobody that says your behavior is okay or not okay. The second way that sports got out from under normal society norms is in normal society, people who hold a power position over other people, we have very strict bright line rules. So I'm a lawyer, and I cannot have a romantic or sexual relationship with one of my clients, even if one of my clients is 50 years old, who is perfectly capable of making their own decision. If you want to lose your license, a great way to do it, commingle funds or have sex with a client. That's how you do it. That's how you lose it. But the same rules apply for physicians. And I want to take a little break to introduce a friend of mine who came with me here today. Jen Glassman is a physician. She lives right around the corner. She and my son and her son are good friends. And she's here with her daughter, Anna Glassman, who's about to be a senior at University of Virginia in aeronautical engineering, which I think is kind of cool. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. So thanks for coming here today. So Jen she's a physician, she cannot have a romantic or sexual, right? And you were taught that, right? Everybody knows that, right? So same thing with religious leaders and counselors. Everybody at the Betty Griffin House, I would bet, Joyce, am I right? Everybody at the Betty Griffin House knows that they cannot have a romantic or sexual relationship with their client, right? Am I right? I don't know where she's sitting, but I'm like looking for somebody to be, yeah? Okay, all right. Okay, not true in coaching. For some reason, people say like, well, they're in love. You just can't stop love. And even so they say like, as long as it's not illegal, i.e. it's an underage girl, what's wrong with it? As long as it's not illegal. So the person calls me up and there's no law. There's nothing there to protect them. This was 2010 when I started getting involved with this movement. So I, of course, think that I can be the savior and can fix the world. So the Olympic Committee, so I'm like part of a clan, if you will, right? These are my peeps. So I call up Scott Blackman, the head of the Olympic Committee, and I tell him like, listen, we got a problem here. There's a huge issue out there. It's not being addressed, and the Olympic movement here really needs to start addressing here. Great, Nancy. What free labor can you do for me that I can postpone this for another 6-8 months? So I wrote position paper after draft, after, creating, they have a new United States Center for Safe Sport. I wrote the first draft of what that organization was supposed to look like. One thing, right, and finally I realized after a couple years, this is really unsuccessful. I am not winning at all here. And I need to figure out another strategy here. So I went to the media, and I told them, with my clients, how bad it was out there for club and Olympic sport athletes who were being abused. It's really hard to get media attention for a case when there's not a lawsuit that's associated with it, right? There's like, what's the hook? Like, okay, she was abused, but what's, right? This is before the Me Too movement. This is, right? But what's the, how do I, talk about it? So, in 2014, I got 19 victims together from just one sport, swimming. This is yummy, by the way. I got 19 victims of sexual abuse together, and we got together to protest the head of United States Swimming, right? It's one of those sports underneath the Olympic Committee, and how it was that he was handling sexual abuse. So we said, you did such a bad job. He had just been elected to be into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. And we said, he did such a terrible job here. He knew about flat-out pedophiles, profound, that were moving around the country from place to place to place, leaving this wake of destruction, and he didn't do anything about it, right? So you get it, like the club that used to employ this pedophile coach can't really do that much about it, okay? The police, unless they've got a victim who comes forward, you do know how rare it is that a pedophile actually sees a day in prison, right? If you want to keep your kids safe, like, I'm really glad the police are there, and I'm really glad the work that they do, but that's not how you got to keep your kids safe, is relying on the police to do the work. They're just not going to do it. So we filed this petition with the Hall of Fame, and it was on the front page of, the New York Times and the USA Today, and it was all over the country, and certainly within the Olympic movement. And with only 5 days, he backed out, okay? 1 week later, Scott Blackman, he's the head of the Olympic Committee, says, we're going to start the United States Center for Safe Sport. Yay, they made it. And I'm like thinking like, thank you very much, thank you. No, okay. So Scott Blackman then goes and takes years and years and years, and he has one study, one commission, one group right after another. It takes him forever. The U.S. Center for Safe Sport is supposed to be kind of like a good HR department or a good Title IX office that operates within a school, right? So it can do one of two things, right? An HR department, I'm sure all of you all know, can protect the institution and sort of not really help people who are being discriminated against or being sexually harassed, right? Can do that, but it also can be a force for good. So that's what the U.S. Center for Safe Sport is, a separate entity that is from all the coaches who all know each other and whatnot, to be able to get them out. So I just got back from Washington, D.C., got in around midnight last night, and where the Olympic Committee is now being held to account because of one particular case. Do you all know what that case is? Larry Nassar. Larry Nassar. He had 250 victims, okay? So you had the Me Too movement come up, and then you had, when Larry Nassar, right before he spoke, Michigan State University, the Olympic Committee, United States Gymnastics are all defending every single thing that they did. After those women spoke, I mean, seriously, they were so powerful. They were so amazing. They were so vulnerable, and yet so they still were sort of retained their own sense of power. After those women spoke, I think it was 250 spoke the first week. After 250, and it was live streamed, the number of cases that the U.S. Center for Safe Sport had quadrupled, okay? So with only 18 months of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport being open, they have had 800 cases. 80% of them have been within the last year, okay? This is not a small issue. This is a huge issue. So like Scott Blackman, who really made my life miserable for quite a while, to see like my mom who tries to convince me, now Nancy, now you need to rise above this. I'm like, oh no, it's just too great. The Schadenfreude is just all over me. I just can't be happy enough that he is like being maligned. I just saw, I mean, Steve Penny was then head of United States Gymnastics, and he gave me such a hard time. And to see him at the hearing, and he took the Fifth Amendment, so he was called in front of the Senate and was asked questions about his behavior, and why didn't he report Larry Nassar sooner, and why didn't he tell Michigan State, and he stayed still. So this has been this great culmination, this great moment. I know a lot of you are asking, well, I'm not really involved in Olympic sports or the Olympic movement. So really what it is that, what can I do? And let me give you some takeaways on what it is that you all can do. And I'm gonna go back to when I was 19 years old and I was in college and I was out running, and Duke has two campuses, East Campus and West Campus, and I was raped for about 2.5 hours. So we fought for a long time in the bushes, and then he dragged me back into the woods where it was pretty clear that nobody was ever going to find me, nobody was ever going to see me. And the whole goal of this 2.5 hours was not his own sexual gratification. The goal was how to like humiliate and degrade and be as awful, make me feel as awful as possible. When I started passing out, so those of you who passed out, you know how like the world goes, it was really cold outside, and he told me lots of things, but one of the things was, if you shiver, I will kill you. So I stopped shivering, so I got really cold, and I started to pass out. And so I saw the world, and I was like, this is it, baby. You've done everything you can to try to get out of this situation. I had told him I was pregnant. I told him I had VD. I told him that my mother loved me. And I begged him to let me go. And like, I didn't know what else to do after all this time. And when I started crying, he liked it. And shortly thereafter, he left. So I went directly from there to the police station. And yeah, I made it. No, I'm very, very lucky to be alive, truly. I went from there to the police station. And thank goodness for the feminists and the women, again, like Joyce, who came before me, who made those police officers were nothing but loving and kind and solicitous, and what can I do for you? And, I'm like, I think of, if I had been in India, I might have had to marry that guy. I would have been separated from my family and would have been told that I was causing them harm and humiliation. So I got two things that every victim needs that I hope that you all take this with you. I need a little more wine. Because when somebody gets choked up, right, wine always makes you better. I got two things that all victims need. And the first thing I got was people believed me that it happened. I was really beaten up. I didn't know him. I didn't, I hadn't been drinking and I wasn't wearing anything flirty, so I fit into that narrow category. So I got believed, okay? It's really important to believe people when they come to you and tell you. I can't tell you how important that was, that when I get clients, typically they're not believed. The school doesn't believe them, nobody believes them, their family doesn't believe them. The family will tell me, I'll be talking with like I say the kid, but like, an 18, 19-year-old, and then the parent on the other line, the parent will say something like, well, they just made one bad mistake, they just had a little too much to drink or something like that. No. They did not make any mistake. They made no mistake, no. People are allowed to drink too much. There's nothing illegal about it. They're fine. They did nothing wrong. Not to blame at all. They should be allowed to drink. And for them, a lot of times that's sort of a revelation. The second thing that I got that I hope that you all will provide out there is the right people, not everybody, but the right people believed in the depth of my emotional harm. So we didn't know what it was called back then, this is 1981, but I had a great case of now what I would say is PTSD. So I felt eternally fearful and anxious and worried and I had like a hyper startle reflex, and I had this crazy behavior of checking the door to make sure that it was locked. So at night, so you can imagine, right, after you're lying in bed and you've already checked the door several times that night, and you checked it 10 times the night before that, and 10 times the night before that, and 10 times, the door's locked, okay? So I knew it was locked, but I still couldn't stop myself from going and getting up and checking to make sure the door was locked, right? So it was, I knew it was crazy. So then I'm embarrassed that I'm being crazy. If I could go back and change one thing in my entire life, entire 56 years, it would be this. When I was in the hospital, I told myself, you are not going to let this get you down. This was one bad 2.5-hour experience, and you are going to rise above, and you are not going to let this he's already taken 2.5 hours from you, and he's not going to take another minute, okay? If I could do one thing over again, is I would never have said that, because it denied me the ability to heal. I kept trying not to feel. I kept trying not to have to go through trauma recovery. I've become friends with the judge in the Larry Nassar case on Facebook. And and I just think she's amazing that she let these women, one right after the other, get to speak or whatnot. And I just have this one teeny tiny little thing, which is she would say, like, leave your pain here. I wish it worked that way, and maybe for some people it does, but it did not for me. And it really took quite a long time before I was able to sleep, right? So Duke University recognized that I was on the cusp of losing it. And so they made all kinds of accommodations for me, the same kind of accommodations now that I can get for my clients. So what did they do? They moved me on to Maine West so I didn't have to walk through woods in order to get to class, okay? Everybody wants to live on Maine West. There are no empty spaces in Maine West. So they moved me on to Maine West, number one. Number two is I dropped 2 classes, and it doesn't even show up on my transcript. So it should have been withdraw fail. So it's just, they just don't exist. Then I got into 2 car accidents, bang, bang, never had one before, never had one since. And so my mom just said, Nancy, just get home. Just get home. So I literally just drove to the airport, didn't pack anything. I just got on a plane and went home. And so I didn't end up taking my finals. Oh my God, stop, Nancy. I didn't end up taking my finals until that spring that was coming up. So my professors bent over backwards, they have to create a whole new exam. And then I kept getting parking tickets because there was 2 parking spaces. And one of the parking spaces was, I had to go through woods in order to be able to get, to my dorm room. And so I kept parking illegally. And so I went to go pay my parking tickets, and the police, who now know me, because I've sat there for a million times and I drew sketches and looked through a million books, and we put composite to try to find this person. They never found him. But they knew me. And when I went there to go pay my tickets, they said, well, why do you have all these tickets? And I said, look, I just cannot park over there. And so they gave me a special parking pass that allowed me to park pretty much everywhere. I mean, I couldn't park where the ambulances went, but I got to park where the religious leaders went. I got to park pretty much anywhere. So I never got another parking ticket, right? So when the story people could tell, or the story I could tell is, Nancy Hogshead Makar, she got raped, and she went on to have this great life, and she has an amazing husband, and I really do, and beautiful children, and I really do. She did it, and you can too. Just, don't let it get you down, okay? Wrong message. Wrong message. Number one is I really did struggle for quite a while. And number two is when people saw that, they didn't shame me about it. And they didn't try to, say like, just get yourself up, pick up yourself up. So when I'm, I'm not a therapist, but a lot of times my clients frankly want me to be a therapist. And I always have to make sure I understand what the distinction is. But what you all can do is, number one, believe them. Number two is, when they're upset and they're going through trauma, is believing in the depth of their emotional pain. And then third is, just stand and believe for them that they are going to be fine, that they really will get through it. When I went to the library after I was raped, and I tried to find stories of am I ever going to feel better? And my therapist was no help whatsoever in that regard. The stories that were in the library were like white hot, really angry, really upset, and I was like, I got that one, so I feel right now. But will I ever get married, or will I ever, have the life that I ever want? Will I always feel this out of control? There was no model for that whatsoever. So my plea to you is not only when you come across somebody else, but let your sexual harassment, your sexual abuse, your sexual violence be part of your public story. Let other people know, because it tells kids, so the likelihood, the people, the women who, mostly women, but men too, who, when they get raped, are usually between 15 and 24 years old. That's the danger, right? What they need is to have women who are over it, who are sleep like a baby, who are not in trauma anymore, tell them that this is part of their life story. They need to hear Me Too from women that they admire, from women within their circle. So my leaving message with you all is believe that it happened, believe in the depth of their emotional harm, and be a role model out there. However it was that you were sexually harassed or sexually abused, or you know somebody, don't let that be a private part of your life that you're not willing to share with other people because it's embarrassing or because it's ugly or for whatever reason. Let other, particularly young people, know about it because they look up to you and they want to be just like you, and let them know that healing absolutely positively is possible. They are going to be just fine, but they need to have their hand held at this particular moment. So with that, thank you, Kelly, again, for allowing me to be up here, and you're going to come up here now?
Yes.